Hey guys, this is Trig Day 8. So today we're going to talk about identifying the quadrant that an angle is in and then finding a reference angle. So for our quadrants, remember quadrant 4, our axes is split up into 4 spots. So we always start at 0, right? And then 90, 180, 270, 360, and we can keep going around. So we label them in the ways that it increases with our degree measures. So this is quadrant 1 because we start in the top right. And then we go to quadrant 2, and then quadrant 3, and then quadrant 4 is down here. And remember, these are just Roman numerals. That's usually how you'll see them written. They can also write just the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's how we identify our quadrants. And remember 0, 90, 180, and then 270. And 360 comes back around. It's the same as 0. Okay, so that's for identifying our quadrants. And now we're going to talk about reference angles. So just think about what reference means. Usually it's like looking back on something using your sources, right? So when we reference something, we're trying to compare it to something else, right? So usually when we're talking about our quadrants, the easiest one is the first quadrant because that's our smallest numbers. That's usually where we want our numbers to be, because remember, everything in the first quadrant is positive, right? If I'm talking like X values and Y values, every point in this first quadrant is going to be positive. So when we're looking for a reference angle, your reference angle is always going to be between 0 and 90 because you're trying to be in that first quadrant. So when we find a reference angle, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, okay, if I have this angle here, that is my reference angle because it's just in the first quadrant, right? That is the angle, that is the reference angle. So when I'm in the second quadrant, okay, this angle looks similar to this one. So I'm always trying to measure from the x-axis to the angle. So I'm trying to look for this angle. So to find that, this is 180 degrees, right? Over here. This is my 0 and 360 degrees. So if I'm measuring from the x-axis, I do not care about 90 degrees. I do not care about 270. So to find my angle in the second quadrant, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to find the difference between these two angles. So let's say it's something that's like 120, right? That would be in this quadrant. I'm trying to do 180 minus that angle. So I want to do 180 minus the angle in quadrant 2. That's going to give me my reference angle. And you'll see a little bit more when we start getting to actual numbers. But I just want to give you guys the formulas for each quadrant. So here in quadrant 3, again, I'm trying to find how far am I from the x-axis. So if I'm at 180, something down here would be something like 200, right? So I'm trying to find the difference between those two. And then I'm going to do the angle minus 180 for the third quadrant, right? Because that's going to give me whatever that angle is. Then when I'm in the fourth quadrant, I want this angle here, and that's the distance from 360 here. So this would be something like 300 would be down here. So I'm going to do 360 minus the angle because I'm always trying to find what's the distance from my x-axis to that angle, okay? So let's look at a specific example. Let's talk about, let's say 200. Okay, let's say 200 degrees. So first thing we want to figure out is what quadrant is 200 degrees in? Okay, 200 degrees is between 180 and 270. So that's quadrant 3. Okay, for quadrant 3, I'm doing my angle minus 180 because, let's sketch this out real quick. If I'm at 200 degrees, that's like down there, right? That's 200 degrees. But I want to find the distance from the x-axis. So it's closest to 180. So I just want to find this little angle right here. So I'm doing 200 minus 180, and I get 20 degrees as my reference angle. Okay, so once you figure out what quadrant it's in, it's pretty easy to find your reference angle. You're just finding the distance from the x-axis. Okay, so there's our first one. Number 2, 92 degrees. Okay, so 92 degrees is going to be between 90 and 180, so it's going to be in quadrant 2. quadrant 2. Okay, and remember, you are always measuring, it's like really, really close to 90, right? So I don't want you guys to get confused and think that you are just going to whatever the closest axis is. You are always going to the x-axis. So I'm trying to find this angle right here. I want this piece. So I'm always measuring from the x-axis. So I'm going from 180 to 92. I'm trying to figure out how far that is. So I'm doing 180 minus 92. Okay, so it is not 2 degrees because I'm not looking for this piece right here. I'm looking for this part. I'm trying to find how close am I to the x-axis. So I'm doing 180 minus 92, and I get 88 degrees. That's my reference angle. So I'm in quadrant 2, and my reference angle is 88. Over here, it was quadrant 3. My reference angle was 20. Okay, now we're going to do some radians. So for question number 2, okay, sorry, that's number 3. Number 3, we're doing 5 pi over 3. Okay, for 5 pi over 3, first thing you want to do, I don't know where that is, so I'm going to convert it into degrees instead. So we're multiplying by 180 over pi. So 5 times 180 divided by 3, I get 300 degrees. So that means I'm in quadrant 4. So quadrant 4, that's my first answer. So for quadrant 4, I'm doing 360 minus the angle here, okay? And like I said before too, if you want to convert and subtract 360, or you want to do it with in radians, that's fine. Because remember, 360 is just 2 pi, 180 is pi, and you can do the fractions, you can do it that way, or you can subtract and then convert it back. So we'll do it that way this time. So we're doing 360 minus 300 because we're in quadrant 4. That's 300, that's 360, okay? So we're doing 360 minus 300, we get 60 degrees, okay? But they gave me my angle in radians, so I need to give them back radians. So now I just need to convert this back. So I can do 60 times pi over 180, and then just simplify that. 60 divided by 180 gives me 1/3. So it's just pi over 3 is my final answer there. So quadrant 4, pi over 3. Okay, if you wanted to, you could also do it with the fractions. I'll show you that way too, if you want to deal with the fractions. So I'm doing 360 minus 5 pi over 3, right? So that's 2 pi minus 5 pi over 3. I can change this fraction. Remember, it's 2 pi over 1. I need a common denominator, so it's actually going to be 6 pi over 3. Because I need a common denominator there, and then 6 minus 5 is just 1, and that gives me pi over 3, so it gives me the same answer. If you want to convert and then convert back, just remember your final answer. If they give you radians, it has to be radians. If they give you degrees, it has to be degrees, okay? So that's one extra step you have to do with radians, is just make sure that you're converting at the end. So next one we're going to do is 20 pi over 9. So again, convert first, multiply it by 180 over pi. So that the pi's cancel out. So 20 times 180 and then divide it by 9, I get 400. Okay, so this number is actually not between 0 and 360, right? So I don't know necessarily what quadrant it falls in. So what I want to use is what we did yesterday for coterminal angles, right? Because I can figure out where 0 to 360 is. And if I subtract 360, then I can get where this is in what quadrant. So I'm going to do 400 minus 360, and that gives me 40. Okay, or if you just think about it too, this number isn't super huge, right? If I go 360 is all the way around, so how much more do I have to go? I have to go 40 more, okay? So I've got 40 degrees, so that tells me it's in quadrant 1. Okay, so if I sketch that out, 400 is gonna be about here, but I go all the way around and a little bit more. Okay, so there's my 400. And then 360, okay? And that's 400 is the same as 40. And then that's in quadrant 1. So if you look up here, quadrant 1 is just, that is your angle. So your angle here is just 40 degrees. Okay, so this little chart, these charts up here that I drew for you are basically the only things that you have to remember for this, is you don't necessarily need to like memorize these formulas, right? You just have to remember, I'm trying to find the distance that I am from the x-axis. So if I'm in the second quadrant, all right, I've got something like 120. So 120, I want to figure out how far I am from 180. So you just subtract them. Okay. So we have to remember our quadrants. That's super important. And our degree measures that are in there. But for this, I mean, it's an easy way to just use the formulas. But remember, the biggest thing is just you're figuring out how far are you from the x-axis. That is going to be your reference angle. And your reference angle always has to be between uh, 0 and, or sorry, 0 and 90. It has to be in that first quadrant, right? And I just realized for number 4, we did not finish that one because I gave you a degree measure. And it has to be in radians. So now we got to convert this back. So we're multiplying by pi over 180, and we're going to simplify that. So 40 divided by 180 is just 2 pi over 9. And that's our final answer there. Okay, so make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're putting it. If I give you radians, you need to give me back radians. I know sometimes we forget, but try to remember that once you finish. Just make sure you're checking your answers to see that they are in the same form that they gave it to you. So if they gave you degrees, you got to give back degrees. If they gave you radians, you got to give back radians. So go ahead and work on your homework for Trig Day 8.